teachers, the teachers, the teachers, the teachers. My brothers and sisters of color, we gotta do better. No survival in this era if we turning on each other. Like a family reunited, they hate it when we together. Now let's talk about it. Listen to the teachers, let them tell you. You want facts behind your questions, Dr. Rick, give them the answer. Followed by wise words, introducing Dr. Michael Blanche. Many guests and activists every week leading by example. When there's problems, there's solutions. Together we are the answer. The teachers.
Hello, everybody. Dr. Rick Wallace here, dropping in on you. Hope everybody is having a great start to your weekend. We're excited to be back here. Dr. Michael Blanchard and I, the Teachers. We have an exciting episode of the Teachers coming to you, where we're going to be talking with retired Lieutenant Colonel Reuben Keith Green. I'm going to introduce him to you in just a second. This particular episode of The Teachers is brought to you by the Epic Realm community of high achievers. For those of you who are looking to change your life, to take it to the next level, to be surrounded by like-minded people and exposed to resources that will help you take your life to the next level, the Epic Realm community is a great place to start. Also, for a limited time, those who sign up for the Epic Realm community will be given a free rapid change breakthrough session with yours truly. Now that all of that fun stuff of paying the bills is out of the way,
Lieutenant Green is live. We got it's fixed.
Great.
The difficulties are fixed. We see you, my brother.
Great.
Glad to be here.
Great. We were having some technical difficulties, and we were going to have to kind of rough it and bring him in via third stream device, but he looks like everything is up. Camera's going, mic's going. We're all good. So I'm just going to read a short bio clip of.
I just lost the volume. I had you on speakerphone, but I'm having a little trouble hearing you right now.
Okay. What about you, Doc?
I can hear you fine.
Okay.
I just kind of went muted a little bit. I can hear you just barely in the background.
I'll tell you what, I'll call him back, and I'll put that way he can hear.
Right.
Call him back on the
hopefully it won't be any feedback.
Yeah, if it is, let me know.
I will.
I'm gonna hold up. Here you go. I'm gonna put the phone there.
Hello.
Okay, can you hear me, Lieutenant Colonel?
I can hear you now.
Okay. Your camera froze up again though.
Yeah. But everybody can hear me though, right?
Lieutenant Colonel, can you hear Dr. Wallace?
I can hear you just fine. I'm just bringing the camera back.
Okay, great.
Okay, good. Good.
Oh,
Okay.
I can hear you fine.
Okay, good. All right. Let's see. It's Reuben Keith Green is a retired naval surface warfare officer who served 22 years in the Atlantic Fleet. That's 22 years, people. From 1975 to 1997, he spent 10 years in the enlisted ranks before obtaining his commission via Officer Candidate School in 1984. He qualified as a steam and gas turbine engineer and served as a tactical action officer in the Persian Gulf and as an executive officer in the hydrofoil USS Gemini. He is the author of Black Officer, White Navy, about his service in the military, and several other articles that pertain to minority service in the military. He can be found on LinkedIn, but no other social media. And I thought that was interesting with the world of social media, that he has managed to be as effective and forceful as he has and stayed away from all of the toxicity of social media. Well, with that being said, Doc, this is another gem that you've brought to the table. And so I'm going to let you further bring in, this unbelievable icon and let you explain how you knew him and how you guys came in contact, and we'll take it from there. And I get to sit back and listen.
Absolutely, absolutely. I met Lieutenant Colonel Reuben Keith Green of the retired from the Navy on LinkedIn, actually. And I was just amazed at some of the things that he has done over 30 plus years in fighting institutionalized racism and discrimination in the Navy. And of course, that caught my eye because I have been doing the same thing for the same amount of years in the area of law enforcement and criminal justice. So I had never seen someone that had rose to the ranks as high as he did, that was involved in Black empowerment movement work, so to speak. So welcome, Lieutenant Colonel Reuben Keith, to the Teachas. We're glad to have you. I'm sure that our guests will learn a lot today. But I guess my first question would be, tell our viewers about your upbringing and your background growing up. Hello? I don't hear anything. Yeah. Hello?
I'm here.
Did you hear my question?
I'm having a little bit of a delay, so.
Okay, I was asking you, what was your upbringing and your background growing up?
Okay. Yeah, I'm having a slight delay,
Okay.
so I'm hearing your comments twice, so I hadn't got to your question yet. So if you'll come to me through the speakerphone, I can hit.
Okay, let's do it.
My background is my father was in the Navy. He spent a couple of years in Korea. He joined as a 17-year-old, became a paratrooper, served in Korea, and then switched to the Navy. And his service in the Navy was not. It was pretty typical for an African American during that time. He got out in the 70s, and he was adamant that I was not going to join the Navy because he said the Navy was too racist. Of course, I was 17 years old and knew everything, so I decided I would trust what Admiral Zumwalt was saying. He was the CNO. Said that those days were over. He issued what's called a Z-gram number 66. So there's no Black Navy, no white Navy. There was just one Navy, and it outlawed all the official and unofficial discrimination that was taking place. Well, this was 1975 when I joined, so it didn't take me long to figure out my father knew exactly what he was talking about. But my goal when I joined was to become a surface warfare officer, so I went to a technical school in Charleston, South Carolina, Mineman A School. Learn how to do maintenance on underwater explosives, 250 and 500 pound bombs, which could get exciting from time to time. But once I graduated from A school, you still there?
Yes, we're listening.
Once I graduated from A school, I graduated. I qualified number 2 in my class, but they cheated me out of accelerated advancement and honor roll by altering my GPA from 6.1 something to 3.57. I thought they were sending me a message with that 357, so I didn't say too much. And then they told me I didn't qualify for accelerated advancement because I was a reservist. And both of those things were, one is they altered my GPA. The other thing they told me was wrong. And I didn't find that out until I went to a reserve unit. So I wound up spending a couple years in the mine force, deployed and did stellar work on 2 detachments. Got nominated for Sailor of the Quarter, and it's Lieutenant Commander, not Lieutenant Colonel, But yeah, I did 2 years in the mine force, left there, and I went to Guantanamo Bay. I changed ranks from a mineman, which is underwater explosives, to a yeoman, which is an administrative rank. So what I did then was I was the masked yeoman for captain's mast, non-judicial punishment for 2 years down in Cuba. And I got a real education on how Black people were treated differently in the legal system while I was there. I got to see up close firsthand. And that job led me to apply and volunteer to become an equal opportunity program specialist in the Navy because I could see all the discrimination that was happening. And I was able to document it every 6 months, every 3 months in what was called the Equal Opportunity Quality Indicators. And very consistently, every 3 months, Black people were being punished more harshly and more severely than white people. So that led me to the Defense Equal Opportunity Management Institute, where I thought I would become an equal opportunity specialist, then go out and change the world, change the Navy, one command at a time.
Right.
Well, I got thrown into the lion's den. I went to a very conservative maintenance organization in Bayport, Florida, and I barely survived that tour. I was being targeted for destruction, and it wasn't for a retired Master Chief who came to work for me. He was not retired at the time, but I went to work for this guy who looked out for me and made sure that I was taken care of. And thanks to him, I survived that tour. And a few months after I left there, I applied for officer candidate school. I had gathered up, I completed my requirements for a bachelor's degree while I was on active duty in my spare time, which is not something many sailors do. And I went to officer candidate school in 1984 and got commissioned in October 84. And then I served 3 ships in a row. And then I went to a squadron where I became the training officer for a seagoing squadron. That was a great tour. A lot of drama there, but I got a lot of things done. And then in my final command, which I did not know was my final command, I went to work for a guy who was born, raised, and educated in the great state of Alabama in 1971. He took one look at me and decided I could not do the job that I've been ordered in there to do based on nothing other than my skin color. He didn't talk to me. He didn't look at my record. He didn't do anything. He just assigned me the lowest job on that staff, which was a division officer job that had no subordinates, and it was a part-time job where I had been ordered in there to take over the telephone office, which was installing a new phone switch that had been rescued from Mount Pinatubo eruption in the Philippines. And that was where the exciting times began for me. The life or death career struggles began, and I wrote the entire chapter, 12th chapter of my book about that, and also the discrimination complaint I filed after that. For 20 years after I retired, I wanted nothing to do with the military. I was like my father. I was bitter. I was angry. I was damaged. And I started writing my book in October, it was about 2006, when Barack Obama started running for president. And after he got elected, and I realized we were in the post-racial society, I just put the book on ice until Donald Trump started running for president. And that's when I knew we were going to have some of the same problems that we had in the 80s, because the rhetoric was the same, except it was much more intense and direct. So I decided to go ahead and publish the book. I stay away from all of the sources of social media, but I've been active on LinkedIn for 4 years, and I believe I've had an impact.
Outstanding. Give us a few examples of some of the institutional racism and discrimination you and other Black naval officers faced during your career, if you can.
Okay, I like to give the example of my first tour as an ensign was great. I had 2 good skippers, 2 great skippers. My competition was like 10 other ensigns, and they had much better educations and backgrounds than I did, but I outworked and outperformed those guys. And I worked for a guy named J.D. Barton, Captain J.D. Barton, and he had been one of Admiral Zumwalt's young Turks. So he kind of took me under his wing, and he made me the #1 guy. He's the guy that said that I should go directly to the department. I did something very unusual, which was I got my engineering qualification on a steamship while I was serving in the communications department. I was the only officer on the ship that achieved that qualification, and that led me directly to department head school. Normally, you would have a follow-on, what's called a get well tour, a junior officer tour, second tour, but I did so well on my first tour, and so I went to department head school. When I arrived at department head school, when I graduated, I was the junior department head in the entire Atlantic Fleet. I had skipped ahead about 2 or 3 or 4 years over the rest of the people in my year group. But when I checked into that ship, I was the only Black officer on the ship, and I was in the engineering department, which is the hardest job on the ship. Anybody who knows anything about the Navy will tell you that the chief engineer is the hardest job on the ship. And unfortunately, I checked in 2 weeks before the ship left for 3 months refresher training down in Guantanamo Bay. So it was just a confluence of very bad things that happened. And I was greeted with such hostility and virtually a lack of respect from even the men that worked for me and also the officers that I worked alongside. Once we had a major fire and explosion a month before the ship was supposed to deploy. And so I had to try to get my ship put back together, $1 million worth of repairs to my engine room. I put out the fire myself along with 2 other individuals, and I had to try to get the ship back in order. And at the same time, I had to convince the Navy to install us a shaft seal. Your shaft runs through the hull of the ship, and our installed shaft seal kept failing. So I wrote these Nobel Prize-worthy casualty reports convincing the Navy to give me a prototype shaft seal before they sent me to the Persian Gulf, because I didn't want to be responsible for my ship sinking in the middle of the Persian Gulf. So I had $2 million repairs going on at the same time. And my supply officer, the guy who was responsible for getting me all the parts, he was purposely slow-walking all of my parts requests and denying them, et cetera, et cetera. I talked to my captain, I talked to my executive officer, I talked to all the department heads. Nobody would help me. They just seemed to blow it off. And I finally stayed up one night, all night, and I put together a spreadsheet. I had to pull all these disparate things from different parts in the supply system and put them all on this brand new spreadsheet that I created. And that spreadsheet had my 25 most critical parts that I needed to deploy. So that morning, I stayed up all night. That morning, when the captain came aboard, I walked up and I handed him that report, and I said, if you don't help me, you don't recognize what's happening to me here. This ship is not going to deploy on time, and you're going to have to explain that to people very high up, and who are not going to be very happy about this. I've told you repeatedly that I'm not being treated fairly. This will show you what's happening. And, if you're going to allow this to continue, you just need to realize that the consequences are going to not just fall on me, but also on you. We went over the report. He kept asking me all these questions about why my parts were getting canceled, why we were sitting there, why they weren't being ordered, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, I don't know. You have to talk to the supply officer about that. He calls up the supply officer, and I hand him this report, which he's never seen before because I just created it. And he didn't have any good answers either. So the captain blew his top, and the supply department worked around the clock for about 72 hours ordering all the parts I needed. And my captain liked that report so much that he ordered the rest of the departments to learn how to do it from me. So now we had to do an updated report every day. So now I was the only one forced to do all this extra work, and all the people that were ignoring what I was going through got very angry when they, in turn, had to do the extra work that I was doing. In addition to standing duty on the ship every other night, because I was there so much anyway, it didn't make any sense to go home for 3 hours. And so for the month before I deployed, I never saw my house in daylight before I left on a 6-month cruise. And that was in June. So those are long days. That's one example.
Wow. You said a lot there, but it reminds me, the military is eerily similar to the lived experiences of Black police officers and law enforcement. In my lived experience, it starts in the academy when you're hired. It goes through the training process. It goes through the promotional process, and goes through the disciplinary process. Is that similar to what you've experienced? I mean, you see the institutionalized racism in all 4 of those areas: the academy, the training process, or what some people would call brainwashing, the promotional process, and the disciplinary process. And I know in law enforcement, on the department I was on in Indianapolis, you had 18% of African-American officers making up the department, yet we made up 70% of the discipline. Is that consistent with what you saw in your career in the Navy, or was it somewhat different?
That is very consistent, and the Navy's own studies document that. They revealed, and they have for years. The Navy did a report in 1988 when I was an officer on getting ready to go to the Persian Gulf. It said that there was widespread bias and discrimination against Black officers and Black servicemen in the Navy. They commissioned this report, and that there were 173 different recommendations for fixing this problem. This is 1988. Now, the Navy had started reporting those discrimination statistics to Congress in 1987 based on some work that Congressman Ron Dellums from California did. He toured a bunch of military bases and was getting all these complaints of discrimination and nothing being done about it. So he required Congress to submit an annual report to DOD to submit an annual report to Congress starting in 1987. So from 87, 88, and 89, the number of complaints went from like 50 to 125 to 156. Now, these are approximate numbers. Well, the substantiation rate in 1987 was 6%. The substantiation rate in 1988 was 3%. The substantiation rate in 1989 was 0%.
Wow.
So all this bias and discrimination, but they couldn't find a single case of discrimination in 1989, the year after the CNO said it was widespread bias and discrimination. In 1989, they couldn't find a single case. That trend has repeated itself starting in 2017. They haven't released the numbers yet, but they had a drop in 2017 from a 20% substantiation rate to 6% substantiation rate. So the complaints were going up, but the substantiation rate dropped by 75%. Now that doesn't make any sense statistically. So what happens is they begin to hide and discount and disprove all of the complaints. So that's essentially what the leadership signals can do in an organization like that.
So what's the racial makeup of the rank and file, and as well as the upper ranks in terms of African Americans?
Well, when I joined in '75, the black percentage was about 13 or 14%, and the officer percentage was only 0.5%. By the time I got commissioned in '84, it had risen to 3.5%. And now, all these years later, in 2020, the black officer rate is 7.5%, whereas the enlisted population is about 18%, I think it is. But it should be consistent with whatever it is at the bottom. It should be consistent at the top if people are progressing as they should statistically. But at the officer ranks, there are only 6 minority admirals in the Navy out of about 240 or 260 flag officers. So that is only like 3.3%. So the higher up you go, the more you get weeded out. And that's been a problem. The Navy's gone backwards as far as the flag officers in the last 20 years.
Yeah, I see the same thing in law enforcement where, you have fewer African American officers than you had, in the 70s and 80s. I know we talked a little bit before about the Congressional Black Caucus. Where are they at in this whole thing? Because they've been missing in action. They've been missing in action on a lot of things.
They say that national security and diversity on their website, they say that that's issues of concern for them. The problem is we don't have any congressmen or congresswomen with recent military service. You have 2 black congressmen in the Congressional Black Caucus. Bobby Rush is one, and then there's a gentleman from Georgia who's a conservative Democrat. Neither one of them have any service beyond the 1970s. Whereas on the Republican side, in the conservative Congressional Caucus, there are multiple veterans in there who are hostile to diversity issues, hostile to CRT, hostile to the anti-extremist efforts of Secretary Austin. Senator Tom Cotton comes to mind, where he grilled General Milley and Secretary Austin about their anti-extremism efforts. But no one is talking about the widespread bias and discrimination that's been reported by lawyers, been reported by AP. I've written articles about it. But there's not any champions there, and there are no black women, no black female veterans in the Congress. So there's a lack of representation in the Congress, and that shows up in how they deal with these reports and these issues that are festering in the military.
So in the whole process, from the academy, training, promotional process, discipline, where are you losing most of the recruits? Is it just at recruiting, or is it similar to law enforcement where you're let in the front door, and then every stage of your career, every year they're looking to oust you out the back door? Because that was my experience in law enforcement, where they may hire a certain percentage or even hire a larger percentage than normal, but every step of the way they're trying to get rid of you.
Well, I think the Navy has determined that, at least in the surface warfare officer community, about the 10-year point is when most black officers decide to bail. They just decide they just can't put up with it anymore. The constant racism, the constant disrespect, the and again and again just to be treated fairly. So that's about the 10 or 12 year point where a lot of people decide to go away. When I went through Surface Warfare Officer School, they didn't have any black officers on the staff there. So I did not see anyone that looked like me. And when I went to the executive officer training a few years later, once again, I did not see any black officers that looked like me. So unless you're represented in the training organizations, if you don't see anyone that looks like you, you begin to think that you can't achieve, those levels.
Right.
But I was told by a guy that was that I worked for indirectly, he said during that time frame that surfers name 8 they're young. Well, the other thing you have to remember is there are gatekeepers, and what they do is they don't necessarily ding you, but they don't promote you. Damning with faint praise and certain words and phrases that should be in your performance evaluations and your fitness report aren't used for you, but they're used for other people. And then also they tend to send minorities off on recruiting duty, which is not considered a career-enhancing job. So when you come up for promotion, you don't have the same credentials that some of your peers do. So it's basically the death of 1,000 cuts. The decisions made 15 years before can impact a guy who's looking at major command or flag rank, and it's because there's certain things missing. It's a consistent process of not having a sponsor that will speak for you for promotion and not having the right mentors that you need. When I was having problems at my last job, I literally had nowhere to turn to because I wasn't connected to a lot of senior black officers that could have been able to help me. I turned down a job as a flag aide. They called me at home and wanted me to go become an admiral's aide, and I turned it down because I couldn't shave every day, and I knew that would be a problem. I didn't want to go to work for the wrong guy who could not tolerate a squeaky clean face, but because I had bad problems with razor bumps, I could only shave like every 3 days, and I used a depilatory for that. The Marine Corps just outlawed discharging Marines that have no shave chips and medical waivers for razor bumps. And this is, all these years later, they finally decide that we're kicking out good people because they've got a genetic condition that they can't control, and we're forcing them to walk around with scabs and scars and bumps on their face for no good reason. And I'm hoping the Navy follows suit.
So you spoke a little bit about evaluation. I know in my career I've seen the evaluation process is very much subjective. Can you talk a little bit about how the evaluation process affects African American officers in the Navy?
It is very subjective, and I did 22 months in an 18-month tour as a chief engineer, and I literally don't know how I survived that job. Fires, explosions, equipment falling apart, you name it. Not to mention having to battle my own people in the course of that job. And at the end of that 22-month tour, which should have been 18 months, I had an assist visit that was coming up. And I begged the captain to put it off for just a few weeks because I had some issues with personnel and repairs. And I talked to the captain and the squadron. They just blew it off, said, no, you'll be fine. Came through the assist visit, which was 18 months overdue, and they found some problems. I had not been perfect in my heat stress management program. In 11 months, I had missed one report that I was supposed to do, so they untapped my entire program. I had no casualties, no problems, but they found one space almost a year behind when they were doing the inspection. So they say that my program is unset. Well, that is an unreasonable standard by any measure. But because my captain and I had some issues, I had saved him multiple times, but he decided to ding me on my fitness report. And that one ding on my fitness report could have been the end of my career. Fortunately, I had a strong record before that. They sent me to be an executive officer on the Navy hydrofoil, and I was the best executive officer in that squadron, according to the Commodore. And we achieved all these stellar accomplishments, so that helped me recover from that. But that could have been the end of my career. And it's a very distinct possibility that I did not get promoted early to lieutenant commander because of that one questionable mark on my fitness report. So a combination, a series of those things can end your career unless you have a sponsor or someone that's looking out for you that can vouch for you in a promotion board or something.
So, Lieutenant Colonel, what kind of support did you get from African American officers? You know, I had a mentor that told me one time, the agent of change gets nothing. And so when you step out there on your own, because I've done it myself before, you step out there, you put yourself out there, and folks that wouldn't even support you run in through the doors that you open. So could you talk a little bit about that? How's your experience been regarding that?
That has been my exact experience. I'm disappointed. I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm disappointed in the retired Navy flag officer community because they know the things that I am saying are true, but only one has spoken up publicly. And there was an article in the Washington Post by a retired four-star admiral that talked about his challenges. There's a book out about the first 50 black flag officers. And some of those officers talk about the horrible experiences that they had while they were on active duty. And I know a couple of them personally. But I don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but I get very little backup from the stuff that I've been putting out there, the articles I've written. And people that know I'm telling the truth that can back me up just stay silent. My career's been over for 22 years. I'm worried about the people that are serving right now, the people that call me or text me at 5 o'clock in the morning and tell me that they've tried to commit suicide or considering suicide because they're being crushed and no one will help them. And I've done everything I can to point them in the right direction and try to help them. But I'm on the outside looking in. The Navy Academy removed my book from the Naval Academy library. The Naval Historical Heritage Command wouldn't even acknowledge that I'd written the book until 3 or 4 years after I'd written it. So the Navy has not been very receptive to what I've been trying to say, but no one has challenged the basic facts and the scenarios that I presented as true. I would really love to engage with someone that says, you know, Commander Green, you're full of crap. You know, this isn't the way it is. The Department of Defense removed all of the annual reports to Congress had the discrimination complaint statistics in those, starting from 1987, all the way up to 2006. After I published my book, and I put some of those statistics in my book, they went back and removed all of those statistics, those reports on the internet. So you can't find those anymore. If they're so proud of the way they handle discrimination complaints with all these programs that are designed to help people, why are they hiding the statistics to show what actually happened if you file a complaint?
Go ahead, Dr. Rick.
You know, I've been listening and just taking in everything. I haven't had a whole lot of experience with the Navy, but I have had quite a bit of experience with the Marines and the Army specifically, and file and rank and how things are done and how difficult it can be for someone on the inside. And for the average person, they don't understand how things work inside the military. Doc, I think you have a pretty good idea because it's similar to police department, but it's tighter.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, literally the things that can happen to you by simply going over the head of your commanding officer. It's crazy. And I worked specifically and directly with that whole Vanessa Guillen thing down in Fort Hood. I had a client that was in Killeen who was a victim of rape from a soldier from Fort Hood. And so I got involved with her in trying to fit us. But as you can imagine, Fort Hood being as huge, it's a city, basically. And it supplies the economy for towns like Killeen. And so there's this good old boy connectivity where we don't mess with those soldiers, you know. We let the rank and file deal with them. The problem is what happened with Vanessa Guillen in particular is you couldn't get through the red tape. So something happened to her. They knew what happened. And it took a year plus to get to the answer because of just trying to cut through all of that. And that is on something as significant, as serious as murder and more than likely rape. And then what I'm looking at is, imagine how many other infractions and violations against what you would call normal human rights or civil rights that don't apply to military personnel. You don't have the same rights as the average citizen. And you don't have the same, what I'm looking at, you don't have the same resources or means of filing a complaint or making your concerns known. Because in order to make your concerns known, you got to go over the head of the person who's probably ignored you. It doesn't play out well because this is how the game is played. What I've seen is you got, I'm not as familiar with the rankings of the Navy and how they play out, but you've got in commissioned officers in the Army and Navy, you got your lieutenant. You got your second lieutenant, your lieutenant, your captain, your major, your lieutenant colonel, your colonel, on up to generals and their rankings, right? Well, imagine your commanding officer for your particular company is a captain, right? And you've gone to your sergeant, you've gone past your sergeant, you've gone to your first sergeant, you've made your complaint, nobody's done anything. You told the lieutenant, then you tell your commanding officer, nothing happens. Now you go outside and you go to the brigade commander and you go tell them what happens. What do you think the brigade commander's first mind is because of how things goes? Basically, I guess the term that most average person would figure is you treated like a snitch. Mm-hmm. You can't be trusted.
Yep.
So instead of dealing with your issue, they squash you. And so I wanted to get is that kind of what happens when you start talking about how they deal with racism and other forms of discrimination?
Absolutely. If you complain, you're not considered a team player. And the last thing they want to do is be identified as a command that allows racism to occur. So the best way to handle that situation is to make you the problem and then eliminate you.
Right.
Retaliation is the number one concern of people that file complaints. They have all these fancy programs in place, but if you use them, it's likely to kiss death for your career. I will give you the perfect consent. I had 20 years in the Navy when I went to my last command, which I talked about. The captain took one look at me and decided I couldn't do the job. He didn't even see me for almost 3 weeks after I checked in. Now, once I checked in the command, he decided he was going to interview me. And as we're sitting there having our welcome aboard interview, he asked me he says, well, Keith, have you considered going to department head school? And I just looked at him and I said, excuse me. He says, have you considered going to department head school? And I said, Captain, this is my 4th department head tour. I was the chief engineer on a frigate. I was executive officer on the hydrofoil. I was the junior executive officer in the entire Atlantic Fleet. I was the import training officer in Mayport, responsible for training, dozens of ships. I said, the only reason I'm not in an XO float job on a larger ship is because I'm so junior in the pipeline, there are people ahead of me that I can't get past. As I'm explaining this to him, his mouth drops open, and he's looking at me like I've got horns growing out of my head because he just assumed that I was this non-performing black officer that they'd sent him in this department head billet, and he just assumed I couldn't do the job. And I asked him, finally, I said, did you not read my record, which had been on his desk for 2 weeks? And his answer was no. He hadn't even bothered to open my record because based on his Alabama upbringing and 30 years of experience in the Navy, he just saw me as this, inferior black officer. Well, after that, he makes a phone call or two, I guess, and finds out who I am. And he announces at a staff meeting that he's going to use this superstar black officer that's just been assigned to him, the superstar surface warfare officer, he didn't say black, to run the telephone department, which was no big deal because that's what I've been ordering there before. Then he says, I'm also going to put him in charge of the facilities department, which was another major department on the staff. So now that he understands he's calling me a superstar, he understands what I'm capable of. He gives me 2 very demanding jobs but I only get one paycheck. So where and when he grew up, I put this in my book. He makes this announcement. I'm getting angrier all the time. And then he says, I don't know how you feel about that. So I just looked at him and said, well, when you get around to asking me, I'll let you know. And one of the other department heads spoke up and said, well, he's asking you now. But I'm very angry at the way I've been treated this whole time I've been there. So now I get to do 2 jobs, have 2 opportunities to fail, but I'm only going to get 1 paycheck. So that is an example of how if you're really good, they will run you into the ground.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Somebody else. And if they think you're not good, they won't even give you the opportunity. You know, those are some things that happened to me. But the worst part about that job was what happened afterwards. I can go into that if you like.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, please.
I worked for him for about 90 days, and then I got a new boss. This guy was about a year younger than I was. He was 1 pay grade senior because he'd been an officer longer than I had. He'd served on 3 ships. I'd served on 3 ships. He'd been to some war colleges and whatnot. But he immediately began to verbally abuse me because he was under a bunch of stress. The base admiral had called me into his office and chewed me out and said that I wasn't doing my job and I was causing the Navy to miss out on some good telephone service, et cetera, et cetera. I said, Admiral, with all due respect, just because you believe that doesn't make it true. He didn't know what he was talking about, and he was planning on getting a job with the people that he wanted me to turn over my entire department to so that he'd go to work for them. I can't prove that, but that's the only thing that makes sense. So after some back and forth and flying to Norfolk to try to preach him and convince him that he was wrong and I was right, he called the Secretary of the Navy and had a performance audit done on my department, which took about 2 weeks. And I got vindicated, so we proceeded on with what we were doing. But in the meantime, this new commander was very stressed out because he didn't like the admiral riding his ass. And he started taking it out on me. So we had some conflict, and I told him in a meeting that you're not going to talk to me that way. I haven't done anything to deserve it. I don't appreciate it. I'm not putting up with it. So that put a big target on my back because I just embarrassed him in front of his whole staff. But I was tired of being treated like, I was somebody's boy. Well, to make a long story short, I wound up doing some work outside of my area of expertise for the comptroller who wasn't doing his job. And once I had finished that, these 2 very complex point papers, I forwarded them to the executive officer who sent them to the captain. Well, the captain handed me this email to read a few minutes later, talking about what a great job the executive officer had done distilling all this complex financial information into these 2 succinct point papers. Well, the problem was the executive officer hadn't done a damn thing. I did all that work. So when I said to him, Captain, I don't mind the XO getting credit. I know you're trying to get a promotion, but I'm the one that did all this work. I'd like to be included as part of the solution. Well, I handed the paper back to him. He snatched it out of my hand. He said, well, in that case, it's upset because it's more than 1 page. I'm surprised this alien didn't jump out of my chest and start chopping him to pieces at that point. So that's the day he rewrote the email, not giving credit to anyone, saying that these should solve the problem. So as far as anyone knew, the comptroller, who was supposed to do the work but didn't, got credit for the work that I had done. So you might imagine that after 9 months of dealing with this sort of stuff, I was a little hot under the collar. So I spent a week. I went back to my office that night, and when the sun came up the next morning, I was still sitting there typing my Article 138 complaint logs. I had enough, and I had so much documentation, I was going to bury this guy. Well, I ignored him for a week. I wouldn't go to meetings, wouldn't answer phone calls. When they called me on my cell phone, I wouldn't answer it because I was entitled to a cell phone as the director for the telephone office, but they wouldn't give me one because the comptroller, who was in charge of the money, every time I'd order one, he'd give it to someone else and tell me he'd order me another. So after 9 months of running the telephone office, I was having to use my own personal cell phone. That's the way they used to try to belittle and humiliate you. So Captain called me into his office. I finally went over and sat down with him and the XO. And he wanted to put this behind us because I was hot under the collar. So we went through all of the way I'd been treated at that command, and I had documentation. I had a 5-page complaint ready to go. 56 enclosures that could document everything that I said. So when you go to strike the king, you don't strike the wound, you strike to kill.
Absolutely.
So I finally was starting to lose my composure a little bit. I said, I've been a team player for 2 decades. I've always been a team player, but it's not working for me here. I want to know why I'm being treated this way. And his response was to lean back in his chair and smirk at me and ask me while he was twirling a pencil, do you feel like a second-class citizen? And told me exactly what the problem was. I'd never brought up race at all. But that told me, basically he was saying, I'm treating you this way because you're black and I can.
Absolutely.
So when I filed the complaint the next day, after adding that business about the second-class citizen, he panicked. He was supposed to go on a week tour visiting his commands because he was getting ready to transfer. He canceled that trip. They huddled up for a few days. He had 2 days to respond to my complaint. 10 days later, he still had not responded. But I got a call from a lawyer that worked for his boss and told me they were going to handle it. And I said, no, you're not. The admiral in charge of this base is the convening authority. My complaint goes to him, and he will do the investigation on this. Because they were going to whitewash it. The guy that was from Alabama was going to be the one that was supposedly investigating my complaint. Well, you know how that works. So a few days after I filed my complaint, the chief of naval operations committed suicide, killed himself in the Washington Naval Yard at Admiral Borda. So that took a lot out of the Navy. And after 10 days, I decided, you know what, they're gonna try to find a way to bury me. I'm just gonna offer them an olive branch. And I sent the captain an email. I said, if you'll give me 3 weeks basket leave in January, I will retire on the 1st of April using my own leave, but I don't want to be here after the 1st of January. If you will do that, I will drop my complaint. Well, he was grateful for that. He sent me a response back to my complaint saying that it was inappropriate and that, I understand you withdrawing your complaint. Your complaint's inappropriate. If you need any assistance in filing a real complaint, contact the Legal Services Office. And he included on that response a copy to his boss and the legal officer for his boss, neither of which should have been aware of my complaint because I had forwarded it to them. So the very legal officer who was advising me that she's going to help me was working for that guy's boss against me. So I knew the handwriting was on the wall, so I just decided to retire. And I didn't want anything to do with the Navy for about 15 years after that. And after that's when I decided to start writing the book. And that entire complaint is in my book. I've been hoping to hear from the people that I dropped a dime on. I haven't heard from a single one.
Your experience, even though it's in the Navy, and I'm sure Dr. Rick would agree, is not unique. I'm sure both Dr. Rick and I have heard these same types of lived experiences from African Americans in all fields of employment. You know,
right.
When did you? Let me ask you this: when did you start addressing the issues? Was it after you reached the rank of lieutenant colonel, or you did it your entire career? Because some people say, "Oh, you should play the game, and then when you get up there, you can address it." And a lot of people say that.
I did it my entire career. I filed a complaint while I was a legal yeoman down in Cuba, and my boss called me in and said, "Hey, why didn't you let me know you were having some problems? If you were having problems, you should have come see me." And I'm thinking, well, nobody else can just walk in your office. I'm following the procedures that you put in place. I addressed it as a legal yeoman when I was trying to change the disciplinary actions. I would put recommendations in writing, and the captain would override my recommendations because he was mad at these young black sailors trying to explain to him how they were being treated. So I addressed it as an equal opportunity program specialist, and I almost lost my career for that. I had a master chief that I was working for. He and I went head to head on a procedure, on a policy from the Secretary of Defense, and I put in a request to put out the smoking lamp in all of the classrooms because I was suffering. You're in this old Quonset, you got people smoking like chimneys in violation of a DOD directive. Well, he lost and I won, so that made me his mortal enemy. And he was telling people to give me these negative course critiques when I would teach these classes that he wasn't qualified to teach. I kept getting all these negative course critiques until I caught him doing it. And then I pretended like I was writing up a complaint against him. And he left for the day, and he came back the next day begging me not to submit the complaint and saying I wouldn't have any more problems out of it. So then, once I became an officer, I would counsel people. And there was one female chief while I was in Key West. She was the only chief petty officer, black female, the only black chief petty officer in that entire maintenance support command for the hydrofoils. And she was catching hell. She really was. I helped her. I basically wrote her discrimination complaint for her. And it was investigated, substantiated. The guy who was abusing her was taking non-judicial punishment. She got transferred out of there by the medical community for her mental health. And years after I retired, I reached out to her, asked her if she would like a copy of my book or would want to comment about what happened to her. She wanted nothing to do with it. That part of her life was over, and she wanted nothing to do with it. And I understood that. It was very difficult for me to relive all of my experiences that I went through. I was drinking heavily. I was considering suicide because I was embarrassed at some of the things that I had allowed to happen to me. And if I had been my father, when that guy snatched that paper out of my hand, I would have snatched him out of that chair and thrown him through that second class window, which is what I wanted to do. But then I'd be in jail and he'd be a victim of workplace violence, you know. Right. So you pick and choose your battles carefully. But I've been a fighter against this sort of injustice as I could for most of my career. And for about 15 years after I retired, there was nothing. But once I published my book, self-published my book, I was interviewed by my local public radio station. I was interviewed by the newspaper, and I've gradually built a little bit of a following. And I'm going to continue to try to bring some of these issues to light.
Hey, Lieutenant Colonel, how does a young person work in this kind of paradigm that you just described? How prevalent is it in the Navy today, that the things that you're mentioning? I'm sure that it's going on today. How does a young person who is considering a career in the armed forces, and in particular the Navy, what would you advise them, or how would you advise them to pursue that?
I would advise them to, number one, make sure you know all the directives in your command. Everything that you're supposed to do, you read everything that commanding officer has signed, because you don't want to get caught flat-footed for not having done something you were supposed to do. The second thing is you pay very close attention to your performance evaluations, your fitness reports. You document everything that you've accomplished, and you make sure you have tangible, verifiable, quantifiable data that backs up why you're head and shoulders above the people that are just well-liked. So you make sure you document everything. And I tell people you need to keep a wheel book. Your wheel book contains all the pertinent information that you need to know to survive. And that's what I would tell people. And you need to consider that filing a complaint is the last resort, because that takes the focus from the person that you're complaining about to you. So what you need to do is, I've had to go up and knock on somebody's forehead and say, you got a problem with me because I don't like the way you're treating me. And you just have to confront the situation directly, but also understand that you need to be able to document it. Just saying someone doesn't like you because you're black or you're female or Filipino or whatever ain't going to cut it. You need to be able to prove exactly what you're talking about. I'll give you one more sea story if you've got time, because Absolutely. I was at court-martial because I didn't follow my own pronouncement, and it nearly got me into some serious trouble. I can tell you about it, or
go right ahead.
Oh yeah.
Okay. After my 3 ships in a row, I was the import training officer at Bayport Naval Station. I had started out as the safety officer, but this crusty old captain named Robert Rankin, he was the chief staff officer. And after watching me for a couple of months, he called me and told me that he wanted me to take over the training department. And I said, no, thank you. That's the busiest job on the staff. I don't want anything to do with it. I'm working on a master's degree, and then when I finish that, I'm going to retire and, go get a job somewhere. He said, Keith, you know how this works. If you don't volunteer for it, you're probably going to get it anyway. So I said, okay, sir, can I go home and sleep on it? He said, yes. I went home, slept on it, came in and volunteered. Well, you know how that goes. But it turned out to be the best job I ever had. We did all of this amazing stuff, which I write about in the book. We were the smallest department But because I was willing to stand up to these cruiser and destroyer captains that were trying to make admiral, these guys, they did not like putting their dirty laundry out there. So I did some things that both quieted down things on the waterfront and improved the training. But we had a mobile wet trainer for damage control. It was based out of New Orleans or somewhere. It's very expensive to operate, so they cut the funding for it. So I had this crusty master chief that worked for me at E9. He says, well, Lieutenant, we could build one of those. I said, do you think so, Master Chief? He said, yeah, I got all these connections. We can put one together. So we did. We started building it. When we got in over our heads, I talked to my boss and said, I'd like to turn this over to the Shore Intermediate Maintenance Facility. They've got all these welders and technicians and stuff. They can finish this up for us. So we talked to their skipper, and they agreed to take on the job. Well, there was this warrant officer that was in charge of that project, and he thought it was fun to screw around with this, young black lieutenant. So he kept postponing the work. I had 5 guys that worked for me, hull technicians that were going to assist, and he kept canceling the work. So I finally went over to see him. I said, look, I'm getting flat because this job isn't done. I need you to commit to finishing this job, and I don't want you to cancel any more of these work sessions. Well, he said, okay. Very next morning, he canceled the job. So I waited a day, and I went in the very next morning. It's crack of dawn. I was waiting for him when he got to me. And I said, hey, I want to talk to you about the war wagon. And he says, what can I do for you? He's got his feet propped up on his desk. And he says, I don't have time to talk to you about that right now. Just have a seat now. I'll get with you when I'm done with my morning meeting. So that's when he got called a bunch of names that he didn't appreciate. And I cursed him all the way up to his boss's office. By now, I'm really pretty hot under the collar. So I'm making a spectacle of myself in front of that whole command in this long maintenance bag. Then when we get to his boss's office, there's a staff meeting going on with about 20 of his subordinates there. So by now, it's feeling good to me. So I cussed him out and tell him he's not doing his job and tell him that guy there is the problem. He thinks this is funny. So this guy tells me I'm way out of line. I need to calm down and go back to that guy's office and wait for him. They had a lot of rope in that building. I wasn't going back to that office. So my own office. A few minutes later, I get a phone call from my chief of staff, and he's highly upset. Keith, what have you done? What did you do? What's going on? So I explained to him what happens. And he calls me. He tells me, he says, I'll pick you up in 5 minutes. Have all your paperwork together. So we go into the lines den, and I go up to the captain's office, and this guy is just reaming me a new one. He wants me court-martialed. He wants me punished. Who the hell do I think I am talking to his people like that? Being disrespectful all over the place and accusing people of stuff. And my captain just sits there, and when he's done, all he says is, that's not true. And then he says, Keith, and I spent about 5 minutes demolishing the lies that he'd been told, the stories he'd been told. And he asked me all these questions, and I have an answer for every one of them. So finally, he realizes his own people have been lying to him to cover their behinds. So he works his way down to where the war wagon is supposed to be worked on. And they ask the warrant officer, do you have all the parts you need to complete this job? And he says, yes, sir. So I turned to the warrant officer. I said, you just told me yesterday that you had 4 parts on back order that you needed to complete this job. So the guy looks at me and says, well, we got them stashed. So he's either lying to me or he's lying to his boss. Either way, he's a liar, and he's holding up progress on this job. Because of that, the people in that organization had to work 72 hours over a holiday weekend, around the clock, finishing up that war wagon because he'd embarrassed his boss in front of the squadron chief of staff, and somebody's going to be punished for that. Well, it wasn't me. It was him and these innocent sailors who had done that. So he thought it was fun to screw with this young black lieutenant, and it wound up blowing up in his face. So it doesn't always work out that well, but fortunately for me, I had all the documentation. I had everything I needed to prove that they were lying and they were dragging their feet. The same way I had with the supply officer was doing the exact same thing when I was in my first department job. So the patterns continue all the way throughout my career. Whoever had the ability to control my progress and performance by withholding stuff or delaying stuff would do that intentionally.
Hey, Lieutenant Colonel, you talked a lot about lying, and it reminds me of a post that I saw you write in LinkedIn, and it was entitled "The Big Lie." And I don't know if you remember, you posted it about a week ago, and in it you talked about former President Trump. You talked about Iraq, Vietnam, Afghanistan. Could you close us out with what you wrote and educate our viewers about that? What you wrote in that post called "The Big Lie"?
I will do that. The big lie will get people killed. And Donald Trump's big lie, the example I used with him was when the Iranians attacked that American base and dropped those missiles on there, and we had dozens of people with traumatic brain injuries. And when Donald Trump was asked about that at a press conference, he said, no, nobody got hurt. A few of them had little headaches, but that was it. Well, because of that big lie, the Army was reluctant to issue Purple Hearts to those people, which would improve their VA benefits and their medical care once they got out of the service. And the parents of those people and the spouses of those people listened to the President of the United States saying that nobody would seriously hurt. And these people have traumatic brain injuries for the rest of their lives. There was a colonel in the National Guard. His name was Colonel Fix. He fought for those people to get those medals. The Army told him, don't raise this issue again, don't say anything. But he continued to fight and got additional medals for, I think it was like 39 of those people. So that big lie had the potential to impact the lives of families for decades to come. Well, in the Vietnam War, the Gulf of Tonkin Bay incident, you can look it up. There was a lie that said the North Vietnamese had been attacking ships in the bay when it was just radar returns. So that led to our further involvement in Vietnam, which Johnson wanted to do. The big lie about the yellow cake and Saddam's weapons of mass destruction led Colin Powell to put forth that information that wasn't correct to further our involvement in the war. And all of that blood and treasure that we lost in Iraq was based on a big lie. There are other examples of that, but it is important for people to understand that what you've been told isn't necessarily the truth, so you better do your homework.
Now, what's your feeling about Afghanistan in terms of the big lie?
Well, the big lie that Biden botched up this withdrawal is partially true. But what people don't understand is that Donald Trump negotiated with the Taliban, cut out the Afghanistan government, and set forth this timeline that was impossible to achieve, even under the best of circumstances. So the lie that Biden screwed this all up, the withdrawal was chaotic. You know, the enemy always gets a vote, and nobody determined what the Taliban was going to do except the Taliban. Mm-hmm. So if people go back and look further back, all of this stuff, you can't just look at the end result. You have to look at what led us to where we are. I didn't serve in Afghanistan. That was long past my time. But there are plenty of examples of decisions that were made, and I challenge the leadership all the time. But there is a lack of accountability. But you can't just pin it on the weeks of withdrawal. You've got to go much further back.
Let me ask you this: what's your opinion on the job that Biden has done so far, not only with regard to African Americans, but also regarding the armed forces, including the Navy, and the issues that you are dealing with and trying to fight for?
Well, I can tell you that Biden says all the right things when it comes to diversity and inclusion. He is aware, just as I am, of all these reports coming out about discrimination and extremism, et cetera, in the military. I don't know what he's doing behind the scenes, but like the rest of Congress and most of the military, he is fairly quiet on what we're going to do to address those issues. I will give him credit for not interfering in the disciplinary cases that have come forward. You got lieutenant colonels in the Marines and the Air Force warning the Secretary of Defense, threatening senior officers, and Biden has stayed quiet about that. Donald Trump interfered with military justice as far as Navy SEALs were concerned, as far as pending trials for war criminals, and they were even attempting to interject themselves in that case of Stuart Scheller, the Marine called out the Afghanistan evacuation. So I will give Biden credit for letting the military do its job, but I think he could be more vocal about what's happening as far as our armed forces. But I recognize that he does have a pretty full plate.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That is not the wolf that's closest to the sled for him right now.
Okay. Well, Doc, I think we can just about wrap it up. I want to thank Lieutenant Colonel Reuben Green.
Lieutenant Commander, you got to get me in the right
Lieutenant Commander
There you go.
Reuben Keith Green for coming on to Teachas today to share with us about his book and about his fight against institutional racism and discrimination in the Navy and Armed Forces. We appreciate you coming on, my brother. Thank you so much. How can people get involved real quickly? How can people contact you and get involved, and what can they do to assist you in your goals?
My best contact is LinkedIn. I'm Reuben Green, writer looking for minority veteran stories. You'll recognize the face. I wrote the book for the benefit of people that are going into the service, that have retired and want to be able to tell their own stories. I've got a questionnaire on my LinkedIn page for veterans to download and use it to fill in their stories. Most of our families don't know what we go through in the military. So I want more veterans to tell their stories. And the book is Black Officer, White Navy. It's available on Amazon. And if you know someone that's a veteran or serving, it doesn't matter which service they're in. There are lessons they can learn and use in that book because people have told me so. Go on Amazon and read some of the reviews. You don't have to just take my words for it. You can hear it from people that are serving right now.
All right. Thank you very much, Lieutenant Commander. We appreciate you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you having me on.
Dr. Ricker, you want to close us out real quick?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and close. Again, thanks a lot, Lieutenant Commander. I think that we were able to really expose a lot of things. I think that people who have been a part of the military know exist, and probably some of their family members and people like me who deal with people in the military a lot. And I've been asked, based on my position, what do I think about Blacks and minorities going into the military? I think that while it can be a nefarious experience and navigating the labyrinthine corridors of that can be challenging, I think it has its benefits with the right person in the right situations. And I think that there are certain levels of training, certain levels of self-discipline. And if we're honest, the military has saved some lives of some people I know personally that were headed down paths that were not going to end well for them. And they found themselves in the military. But if you have a close conversation with you, they'll tell you that. And what you do have to understand is when you're dealing with something like the military, where you are dealing with situations where everybody has to trust everybody, sort of like in the police department, you've got to have trust with the person you're going to be on the front line with. There have to be certain rules in place. So I get that. The problem is, if that's the case, if we're going to have to sit up and say, okay, we keep everything rank and file because we got to be able to trust one another, then we have to be able to trust one another, meaning that I need to be able to trust that you're going to not block my path solely because I'm Black. You're not going to be a person that's going to hold me back solely because I'm Black or female or any other identifying outwardly identifying characteristic, that I'm going to be judged solely on the basis of how I perform. Then it works like it's supposed to work. And that's the whole thing. And one of the things that I know that the Army talks about a lot is there's no such thing as black and white, everything's green. Well, is it? And so that's the problem that I have, is that, yes, you can go in and you can do some things and there's some benefits. There are some people that are literally going to be taken care of for the rest of their lives. But what did they give up for it? And so we don't look at that part. I get it. I think they ought to have all the benefits they got and some more. When you put yourself out there and you put yourself in that position, which I have the utmost respect for, because you got to realize there hasn't been a draft in almost 50 years. So everybody that's going in there to put their lives at risk are doing it on a volunteer basis. And I think that should be honored. I think that should be respected. There are a bunch of people who are in my position as my colleagues that believe that there's no place for the black man in the military. I think the black man needs military training. And that's my personal belief. I think the black man needs military training. And I think so. I think we need that. I think that, but what we also need to do is prepare our black men before they ever get to that point, to know who they are, to know what they're facing, to be prepared to navigate it, and to know why they're going in and what they're going to come out with. And to me, that's important. But the stories, that we heard today are not unique. And I think we have to be honest about that. And we have to understand that we're fighting, it's like fighting an elephant with a switch. Ain't much happening right there. It's that system is built that way. So until we can get enough force to actually make the people who can hold people accountable at the highest ranks, we're spinning our wheels. But I think that having someone who's brave enough to tell their story, to put it in paper, because I kind of make him akin, even though Norm Stamper isn't black, I kind of make him akin to Norm Stamper, because Norm Stamper was a police chief, a white police chief, as a matter of fact, of San Diego and Seattle. And he broke rank. And he wrote a book called Breaking Rank, and he told everything. Mm-hmm. But he brought out the truth, of what happens inside, and a lot of things that people don't understand. I mean, he told some gut-wrenching truths. He put some people in jeopardy by telling the truth, but it had to be told. And so when you get someone, like this, who comes out and says, hey, look, man, this is what happened to me, and I know for certain that it's happening to other people. And I want it to be better for our people. It has to be recognized. It has to be commended. So once again, I say thank you for everybody that tuned in. We want to say thanks once again for myself and Dr. Blanchard. Once again, a great segment. I thank Dr. Blanchard for doing such a great job in bringing quality guests on that can enlighten us and help us broaden our horizon and understanding of what we're dealing with as a people. And that we continue on. Next week, we're going to have a friend, an acquaintance, a filmmaker, Tony Lindsay, an independent filmmaker, Tony Lindsay. I've had a chance to talk with him, share with him, be interviewed by him, and he has a couple of film projects out there. He's really pushing to enlighten and educate our people. And I want to introduce him to you, let him share what he's doing. And we are going to come with that. I think it's going to be fire. And eventually we're going to get Sister Neota, you're on here. Absolutely. And we're probably going to all be banned after that. It's been a good run. But on that note, we're going to get ready to get off. Thanks, everybody. We're out of here. You guys have an